couldn't find a piece of dowel the correct size for my blue polish label, so I printed off another one in red, and I've used the end of an old paintbrush to create the lid, so I didn't need to paint that, so that was a job saved. And then I can stand that under there. It's not completely straight at the bottom, so I'll need to use a little bit of tacky wax to stand that in place. Just sort of pop it there for now. So I'll make a couple of dusters to go with this little selection now, and then I want to have a go at a desk tidy and some pens and pencils. So in the end I just cut a couple of squares, 1 inch or 25mm square from my old duster, and I was trying to do some red blanket stitch around the edge, but because the fabric is so sort of old now and quite open, it was just fraying as I was trying to stitch, so I just leave those as little yellow squares like that. And once I come to do the display and glue everything into place, we can sort of maybe have that hanging over the top of the polish or something like that, but I'll just leave them there for now. So to make the little desk tidy or pen tidy, I'm using plastic straw. I'm going to use this nice bright pink just to break up all the sort of blue and white we've got in there. And you can cut this with your craft knife, so just lay it alongside your rule. And for this I started at 12mm for the tallest one, and then I'm working my way down in 2mm increments. So I've got 12, 10, 8. So now I'm going to do a 6. And it will flatten off like that, but then it will just pop back to a circle. So cut it like that, and that one will go in the centre there. And I'm going to do 2 little 3mm ones to go at the front here. And I've made one of these before, again, for my little craft shed. But they're really easy to make, and I think they look really good. That one flew off over there. Where's the other one? There. And then because these are hollow, we need to make a little bottom for them. And to do that, just have your glue. I'm going to use my tweezers to hold them. And then you just want to dip each one into the glue. Ooh. We'll drop it into the glue. And that will create a base. We then want to leave that to dry, so leave it on its side. If you turn it upside down, the glue will all just drip down, and obviously you have it standing on the base, it's just going to stick to your card. So stand them on the side like that. And that one just popped because I dropped it. Let's try again. So do that with each of them. And whilst they're drying, we can make a start on the pens and pencils. So to make our pens and pencils, we're going to be using cocktail sticks. Now the average cocktail stick is about 2mm in diameter, and that's a little bit too thick. We want them really to be 1mm or less. If you think about the thickness of a pencil in real life, it's only going to be, I don't know, probably about 9mm. So even 1mm is a bit thick, but you can get away with 1mm. To try and get them thinner than that, you'd have to do an awful lot of sanding, and also they can break quite easily. So here's a couple that I've done, and you can see now they look rather like a wand. So it's the thickness of the cocktail stick there where it's been fixed in the Dremel, and then this is the bit that I've sanded. And you can see, well, I don't know if you can see on camera, but it gets thicker as it goes towards the base bit here. So we would just probably use or get 2 pencils out of that piece there, and that would also actually be a good way of making a wand if you were doing a Harry Potter scene or something like that. So I've done a couple already. So you want to begin by cutting the points from the cocktail stick. So roll it along under your blade of your knife. And I'll just find that if you roll it, it cuts a bit easier. Like that. And then I've just been into my new box of rotary tool bits and found out the small bit. So you want something about 1.5 to 2 millimeters. And then you can fit the cocktail stick in. And you don't have to go all the way down because then you're losing quite a bit of the cocktail stick. And then put your chuck bit back on. I should know the names of all these after doing a rotary tool video. I can't remember what I called it now. And then push your button in, sort of jiggle it to get the button to press in, like that. And then tighten up the chuck, really tight, so that the cocktail sticks in there really firmly. You don't want that moving around at all. One more tighten. So that's the rotary tool set up. And then what I've done here is I've used masking tape to attach a piece of 180 grade sandpaper to my cutting mat. And I've pulled the cutting mat right to the very edge of the desk because obviously you don't want your rotary tool cutting into your desk. And then I tried it on number 1, that takes ages to get it to sand down, so I'm using mine on number 2, but it is quite quick, so you might want to just start by having a go at number 1 and then turn it up once you've been sort of sanding for a minute or so, just so you sort of get used to it first. Now because it's very loud I'm not going to be able to speak while it's on, so I'll start now and then I'll do a little bit of a voiceover to talk about what I'm doing. So let's get it started up. So I forgot to say there as well before I started that you need to wear your safety goggles and a dust mask if you have one whilst you're doing this, because it does kick up quite a bit of dust. So just very gently place the cocktail stick against the sandpaper and move the rotary tool along, and by doing that you're not just wearing away one piece of your sandpaper. You hardly want to put any pressure on the cocktail stick at all, as it will just end up snapping, and I've done that a couple of times. Now you might find as you're working that the tip of the cocktail stick starts to curl up a little bit, so just sort of keep your eye on it and move the end closer to the sandpaper if you need to, but never again applying too much pressure as it will just snap off. Now I did a bit of a timing test earlier, and to get it down to under, or to get the thickness down to under 1 millimeter, I was sanding for 4 minutes on the number 2 setting. So keep going until you're happy with the thickness of the cocktail stick, and then you can remove it from the chuck. Oops. I just snapped it a bit there, but that's alright because I can use the top. Okay, so for the length of a pencil you want to be looking at 14 millimeters, and that's 9/16 of an inch, and for a pen you're looking at about 12.5 millimeters or half an inch. So I want to do probably about 3 pens, and then I'll cut the rest into pencils. So just hold it against your rule like that, cut it with your knife. And then 14 millimeters for the pencils. I think that piece might be a little bit wide at the bottom, so let's do a shorter one. Looks like you can make the pencils shorter, obviously for ones that have been used a bit more. The sort of average length would be 14mm. Okay, so we'll start with the pencils, and I'm actually just using coloured pencil to colour them in. So you want to leave about 3mm of natural wood at the top there. So just colour in the base. And then turn it around and make sure that you've got a nice sort of even line around the top there. And you can put a little bit of masking tape around even if that would help. And then bring in your craft knife and you want to shape the natural wood into a little point. So just shaving off a little bit on each side. And just be really gentle, otherwise you'll just end up cutting that bit off. So just sort of keep twisting it around and taking a little slither off. Until you've got it into a nice point. So about like that. I'm not sure if that's focusing properly there, but that's a nice point at the top there. And then bring in a pencil and just make a little pencil nib just by colouring in the tip there. Like that. And there's our first little pencil. So I'm going to do some in this blue, and then I've got a nice red here as well, and I'll do a couple in that. So there are my pencils, and we're now going to start work on the pens. So take your cocktail stick, and you just want to begin by rounding over that top edge. So just with a piece of 500 grade sandpaper, just sweep it back and forth over the top, and I'm rolling the cocktail stick around in my fingers. And that will be our pen top. To colour that in, I'm going to be using a marker pen, and I'm going to be using black, but obviously you can use any colour, but try to use a felt tip pen or a marker pen. Now this is actually a permanent one, so I don't want to get it on my fingers, so I'm just going to colour it in by sort of dabbing it along and then turning the cocktail stick over, and eventually it will become covered in black. When you've covered the main body of the pen, pick that up with your tweezers and just dot a little bit on each end. And that can be left to dry. So I've got one here that I did earlier, and that's now completely dry. And now I've just cut a slither of normal kitchen foil or aluminium foil. And I'm going to apply a tiny bit of glue to one end. And you really do only want it to be a slither. This isn't even a millimetre thick. So apply a little bit of glue, don't know, to about 1/8 of an inch or something. And this is sort of the band around the lid of the pen. So place the pen so you've got a bit overhanging at the top there. I'm not going to measure, just sort of doing that by eye. And then curl the band around like that, making sure you're keeping it straight. Wrap the pen in it. Press it down, and then you can just snip that off with your craft knife. Make sure it's wrapped all the way around. And then from that same little piece of tin foil, cut a tiny piece. And this is going to be like the little lapel clip part. I'm not sure what it's actually called, but you know, the bit that goes on the side of the lid. So just put a little bit of glue on. And then just stick that to the side of the lid. the pearl clip, is it? What did I say? I can't remember what I said now, but you know, like the pocket clip. There, like that. And again, another of those really sort of tiny little details which are going to look really impressive once they're sort of in place. So now we've got our pens and pencils, we need to construct our desk tidy to actually keep them in. So sort of lay the pieces out how they're going to go, and then you want to begin by attaching the front one to your longest back one. And you can use the Gorilla Wood Glue again to attach these. That works quite well with this sort of plastic. So just put a bit of glue down that one. Then press those two together. And I want the next two sort of sizes, one each side of that. Press that into the, trying to get it into the little sort of gap between the two. That. That one on the other side. It'll take a little while to dry, so just make sure that it's all standing straight. And then these little ones can go in each of those little gaps at the front there. And when I picked this one up, the little bottom part stayed on the card there. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but there it is. But it's not too important, because once it's on the counter we can put things in it and they're not going to fall through or anything. So the counter will sort of be the base. But do try and get a little base in there if you can. And then that goes there. I sort of came up with this idea of making these glue bases when I saw a lady making a pair of glasses in a magazine, a pair of Harry Potter glasses, and she made the little lenses by doing that and leaving them to dry overnight. And there's our little desk tidy. So I'm going to leave this to dry now. I'll put all of these bits back on the counter so they don't get lost. And now I want to have a go at making a cash register or a till. So we're going to begin by constructing the cash drawer, and I'm just sort of doing it in sections because then I'm going to be working out the measurements for the next pieces as I go along. But obviously you'll have the cutting list for the entire piece. So start with your base, which is the square piece. And then the top will be slightly wider to incorporate the sides. So apply glue along each side. And again, I've just really made the sizes up for this, just by trying to remember how big a till was. And so really just sort of doing the layout on my cutting mat. And this is going to fit on the counter nicely as well, so I've sort of used that as well as a sizing guide. So lay that down and attach the side pieces. Nice flush edge along the front and back. Now I'll just bring in my pieces of strip so that I can push those against the sides. Like that. And then this time we're going to do it slightly differently because I want a nice flush front and back. So apply glue along the top of the sides. And I'm saying slightly differently, we obviously haven't made this before, but I'm sort of thinking about it as if we were making a closed-in drawer, like I think we've done before for other projects. And then this is going to sit on top, So we're making sort of like a nice flush piece for the front and back to then attach to. So sort of very carefully just manoeuvre it and manipulate it into a nice sort of square, open-ended box sort of thing. My sides are still moving because they're not completely dry yet, but I think that's about right. You can even bring in your front and back pieces and just pop them into place to make sure that you have got nice square ends there. And that looks about right, and then once we've attached the front and back we can go around and give it a good sand, as we usually do, just to make it into a nice flush piece. So I'll let that bit dry off for a moment, otherwise it's just sort of going to flatten. And then apply glue to those front and back openings. Pop that back down and attach the front and back pieces. Put my glue in my finger in the glue at the back there. Checking for the nicest side of the wood. And I'm a little bit off in a couple of places, but like I say, we'll sand that around so we've got that nice flush box. Let's give that a good press. And that piece can then be left to dry. So once that piece is completely dried, sand it on all sides to make a nice flush box. And now we can attach the cash drawer moulding. So I've given measurements for this again, but if you find you've sanded this and taken a little bit off of the height and width of that front, just measure it, and you just want to leave a little border of about 1mm on all edges. You can then glue this into place. Have a little look from the front just to make sure that you've got that nice even border. And then press that into place. As usual, get rid of your excess glue if there's any there. Okay, now we can make a start on the till part. We're now going to shape the register sides, and this is what we're going to end up with. And that will sort of sit up there, and then we'll build that up, and the numbers will actually go across this sort of slanted bit. So let me show you how to cut this shape. So with a nice sharp pencil, make a little pencil mark 6mm or 1/4 of an inch from each end of the piece of wood. Do that at the top and bottom of the piece. Join those up. And then we want to come in or come down 6mm on this right hand line. So again, 6mm, 1/4 of an inch. Join that up as well. Just go across freehand like that. And then we want to do the same down here. I'm referring back to my original design because it seems a lot more complicated than it actually is. So 6mm at that corner, same there, join that up. So you'll have your two lines, 6mm, 1/4 of an inch in, and then we've got the little 6mm square in the bottom left corner and in the top right. And then we want to draw a line between those 2 points. So draw the diagonal line like that. And then this is the section that we're going to remove. Okay, so bring in your craft knife now, and we'll begin by making the cut against the direction of the grain. So this little cut up here in front of that first little box. So just use the tip of your knife. Be really careful because it weakens this corner, so you may find that it splits, so just be really careful. Try and get the tip of the knife right into that little corner before the diagonal line starts, like that, and then come round to this bottom corner and we're going to go across in the direction of the grain. So again, just really carefully. And then you can bring in your rule and we're going to cut across the diagonal. So hold your rule nice and tightly and cut along from those corners. Do a light score to start. And you can go through a bit deeper. I'm actually going to get rid of the rule now and just hold on to it, but if you do that, just be really careful of where your fingers are in relation to the blade. I know I always say that. I would hate for you to cut yourself. So that's come loose and then snip along there. That's why it's important to get right into that corner when you make those first cuts, otherwise you'll find that it's still attached there like that, but it's alright, you can just keep cutting into it. And then sort of tidy up that line if you've still got a bit of wood overhanging the line there. Like that, so there's our other side. So we're now ready to start joining these pieces together. So we've got the sides there and then the register base, back and front. So apply glue along each edge of the base. Pop that back down and attach your sides. And I erased my pencil marks from that side, even though that was the inside of the till, but do just give it a sort of gentle sand on both sides. Press that into place there, that side as well. And this is rather like constructing a sort of odd shaped drawer. So I'm going to grab those pieces of strip again, so we can press those sides nicely into place, like that. Gently move that along so it doesn't stick to your work surface, and then we'll just let that dry off just for a moment. Okay, so now apply glue along the back edge. Pop that down and attach the back piece, making sure that you've got nice flush sides, so you may need to pull those out to meet it. And you'll notice as well that it's slightly taller, and that's because it will then cover the bit that sort of sits across the top there. And I've done it the same at the front so that it covers, you know, the little ledge that will go along there as well. Just trying to get those lined up so that I've got nice flush edges. But once this piece is a little bit more sturdy, we will be able to sand it along the edges. Just not until we've attached all the other pieces, as it will still be a little bit fragile, like that. And then the same along that front edge. Okay, make sure you've got those nice flush sides. Oops, finger in the glue again. And then I'm actually going to just pick that up and give it a press, because this back bit's coming apart again as well. So just sort of very gently press and hold. Okay, so we'll leave that to dry now, and I can now work out the next parts that we need. Okay, so I've now got the final pieces cut. So with your number panel, which is the bit that will go across the centre there. Cut it to size, and then you want to bevel each long edge, and you know how to bevel, just holding it against your sandpaper at a 45-degree angle and sweeping it along. And you want those to be quite nice sharp bevels. And then with the number display, which is the piece that will go across the front here, and the ledge, and I just couldn't really think of another name for it, but it's the piece that will go sort of straight across there. You want to cut the length, so cut the 35mm, then create your bevel, and then cut it to the depth, so the 4.5. Just because if you cut it to size first and then try and bevel, it's going to be really difficult because you can hardly get hold of it to sort of sweep it along the sandpaper. So cut the width, make a bevel, and then cut along the straight edge to the depth that you want it, and do that with both of those pieces, and it just makes it easier to bevel. And then the top piece, which is the piece we're going to attach now, is just a straight piece, so just leave that straight. So apply glue to those little ledges up there. And normally I would do all that on camera, but I really had to test it and see if it all fitted together. And my plan is that if we've got any little gaps or anything, then we can go around with our fine wood filler and fill them in. But I think because of those bevels, we're going to be okay. It should sort of all join together okay. So I'm applying glue now along the long edge of that piece as well. And then you can sit that into place at the top there. So we now want to attach the number panel, and you want those bevels to be showing, so you want them to be facing upwards or towards the front. So apply glue along these slanted cuts. Go over the corners a little bit so we've got a little bit extra on there. And then lay that into place so that you've got nice flush sides. Oops. Now I'm just going to measure this bit first. So the bevels sort of join up, so the bevel is here and facing down, and then that should just lay nicely in there. And I've now got a bit of gap in, which I didn't have when I tested it. Let me move that down a tiny bit. Try that bit again. Still got a little bit of a gap there. So I think what I'm actually going to do is make that a little bit wider. So if I do it to 5mm, and I'll change the cut in this, so don't worry about that. I'll change that now, so the measurement I give you will be correct. And it's sometimes that happens when you glue it into place. It's slightly different to when you're sort of just holding it all together with your fingers. So what I would actually do, let me just change camera position. So I cut a piece to the width that I need it, but obviously a lot deeper, and then I would create my bevel. So a nice sharp bevel like that, and then I would turn that face down and take my measurement from the straight edge there. Just go a little bit thicker this time. And cut that, and then I'll keep this bit of wood here in case that top bit is slightly different as well. Nice gentle cut, and then we'll try this piece again. Just tidy that up along that edge. Oops. Sanding my nail varnish off like that. So the bevel is facing down and towards there, and we just want it to slot nicely in. Still a little bit tight, so I'm just going to sand a tiny bit more off. I think that's going to be okay. I don't want to take too much off because I don't want there to be any gap in at all, but just having it a little bit tight like that will actually cover up those lines. So I'm going to glue that into place. So I need to put a bit of glue along those little side bits there. Along the flat sides, and then along the bevel and the back of this piece. Like that. Turn that over. Got my bevel in the wrong place now. Push that in there. I think in fact what it is it's a little bit wider this side. So obviously this is placed a little bit wonky, but that's okay. I can sort of manipulate it into place and then I can sand so that that's nice and flush along that ledge. You see how it's a little bit higher at that end, but I'll sand all that flat. So let's try the numbers panel as well. And that is actually a little bit high now, but that's okay because I can just trim a little bit off of there. Try that again, and only ever take a tiny amount off at a time. It's better to have to sort of do it several times than cut it too short. And again, I've got more of an overhang at that end, so that end's okay, so I need to actually come at a slant now. Let me just measure that again. Ooh. So that was okay, so I need to come up that end. And that will go there. So it's still a little bit higher, but again I'll just sand all that flat once it's in place rather than cutting any more off now. And then we've just got a little bit of a hole at the end there, which I can just use a little bit of filler on. So I'll glue this bit into place now. So pop your glue along those edges and along the top. And then along the bevel. Press that into place. So I'm now going to leave that to dry, and then I'll go round and sand it on all edges and get rid of all these little lumps and bumps. So once this part had completely dried, I sanded it on all sides and then just sanded it in my hand along these front areas. And then I'll show you from the side because it's easier to see, I've sort of rounded over this top edge here. See how I've just sort of gently beveled along there, and the back there as well. And then I did that along this little front edge here as well. And that's just so it doesn't look quite so boxy. So I have got a few little gaps, which I'm now going to fill. And I had a couple in the base part as well, so I'll pop a little bit of filler in there. And the filler I like to use, you probably know by now, is this Ronseal smooth finish filler. And it's really fine and really good for miniature work. And just because I have got such tiny little areas to fill, I really am just going to put a little bit in with my finger. Not even going to bother with the scraper. And see how fine it is, you just rub it on and it just works its way into all the tiniest little cracks. I really like this one. That side, no, that side's fine. And then it was just these sort of little holes at the edges of the angled bits here. Smooth a little bit along that back edge as well. And it's so fine as well that you don't have, you know, like with normal fillers, you have a lot of sanding to do afterwards to get rid of all the little hard bits that it leaves. But with this, you don't. A little tiny bit of sanding will be needed, but just a really sort of light sand, just to get rid of any of the residue really. And just brush off the excess. And then I'll just leave that to dry a moment while I go and wash my hands. Use a 500 grade sandpaper to sand away any excess filler. So I've cut here from a piece of 2.5mm sheet wood, that's 3/32 of an inch, a piece measuring 12mm by 5mm, so half an inch by 13/64 of an inch. And this is going to be the little digital display that we'll put on the end of a cocktail stick in a moment. And I just want to round over the edges on both sides. Same on the other edge of the wood as well. We now want to drill a hole in the top of the till, and we're going to push a cocktail stick in, and then we can stick the little pricing display on top at a bit of an angle like that. So I've got here in my drill a 1.6mm bit, so just over 1/16 of an inch. The cocktail stick's a little bit thicker, but I want it to be a really tight fit so that's not going to wobble about. Now I'm not going to measure, but I'm going to do it sort of centrally from front to back, and probably about 6mm or 1/4 of an inch in, perhaps a little bit more. And that will then sort of sit there, so you don't want it overhanging, so make sure you're coming in enough. In fact, I'm going to go in a tiny little bit more like that. So I've probably come in about 9mm, 3/8 of an inch, and I'm in the centre from front to back, so just drill down really carefully. That didn't take much, and then I'm just going to jiggle that around just to make that hole slightly larger, but not too large. And then begin by cutting the pointed ends from the cocktail stick. And then you want to measure, so you've probably got about 6mm coming up from the top if the cocktail stick goes all the way down to the bottom. And again, you can just do that by eye really. You just want a nice sized little sort of stem on there. I'm going to go like that. So 6mm, 1/4 of an inch up, like that. And then cut the stick again. I'll just go a little bit above that, be on the safe side. And this cocktail stick's quite rough, so I'm just going to give it a quick sand. Just the bit that will be sort of sticking out. Just really so that the paint goes on nicely. Okay, so I think this hole will be a bit tight, but try it into place. Just really gently. Then that's going to squeeze in. So what I'm going to do, before I push it all the way in, I'm going to put a tiny little bit of glue on the end, which will then stick to the bottom inside the till. And push that in. Push it all the way down, make sure it's straight. I think I'm a bit wonky. Let me just try that on there. I think that's too long. I'm going to quickly take that out again, take a little bit more off. It just looks a little bit too long, so I'll take about 3mm off. Just refresh that glue. That's better. And then this is actually going to just sort of balance on top, so it will be a little bit precariously placed. Unless we use a sort of wider bit of wood for it, we're not going to be able to drill a hole, so we'll just have to risk it and just be really careful as we're sort of painting. Actually, do you know what? I'm going to face that way, just because the customers will be stood at that side of the till, so that would make more sense, just to have it angled that way. Okay, so now we can attach these two pieces together. So make sure you've got your little drawer at the front here, and this is going to sit so that the back is flush with the back of the drawer, so we've got a nice straight edge there, and then we've got a little bit of an overhang each side. And I'm not sure if tills are like that. I know that when I worked in a shop there were lots of little areas that you could stick pens and things, so I think there were sort of lots of little overlapping bits. But I quite like it like that anyway, so I'll just get a little bit more glue and then actually apply the glue to the bottom of the register part. I'm just going to slide it along a bit so I've got that even overhang. Feeling with my fingers at the back there to make sure we've got a nice flush back. I need to go that way a little tiny bit more. A bit of press. Be careful again where you're pressing so that you're not sort of putting any pressure on any of the delicate areas. You don't want your fingers to go through at this stage. I've done things like that before and it's very annoying. Oh, the little deer's out in the garden again. Squirrels there too. Yeah, she hadn't been around for a few weeks and then she came back yesterday, so I was really pleased to see her. Okay, so that can now be left to dry, and then we can add a coat of paint before we add all of the stickers and the number and the numbers and the display and everything, which I'm looking forward to doing. So cash registers come in all sorts of colours, from white through to pale grey, dark grey, even a sort of cream through to brown. Now I'm going to do mine in a sort of pale grey colour, and I'm going to do one coat over the entire thing, and then I'm going to mix a slightly darker grey for the till, the sort of bottom cash drawer bit, and the little stem of the pricing display up there. Now, having thought about it, I could have painted the pieces separately before gluing them together, but it's too late now, so I'll just have to be really careful when I'm going around the bottom. But if you want to do yours in sort of different colours, then just wait until you attach the two pieces together. Okay, so I've got quite a large brush, but it's really soft, so it will get into all those little areas. And I just wanted to do that darker grey really to make it sort of stand out a bit from the counter, which is a very similar colour to this one that I'm using here. So I'm only going to apply one coat, but as you can see I'm doing quite a good coat to get a really good coverage. So that's the first coat done, and I'm now going to leave that to dry, and I'll just go and mix a slightly darker grey colour. So I've got a little bit of my grey there, and I just want to mix in a tiny bit of black, so just the tip of a paintbrush there, just to make a sort of, I don't know, granite grey colour. I think I want it just a little bit darker, so a tiny bit more black. I'm just going to do that with a cocktail stick this time. See what that does. Blend all that in. That's quite a nice colour actually. That will look nice with the pale grey already there. And my till is actually now dry because I've been printing off some stickers. Well, not stickers, but you know, little paper decorations that we can put on it. So I'm now going to add this darker coat. So I've got a nice sharp tipped brush here, and I'm just going to be extra careful. So I'll start with the little stem up there. this bit is up to you. You know, you can leave it all one colour if you want. Sort of doing a little bit of research online. Some of them are all one colour, even the tray. And then I really want to go around the bottom of the till here really carefully. So I'm going to do the whole tray, but so it's just this bit that is going to be the delicate bit. So that's done as well, and not too bad on my lines. I had a little bit of a wobble around the back. So I didn't really have a sort of ridge to follow, so that's a little bit uneven, but I can tidy that up again with the lighter paint, although that is going to be sort of facing into the shop, that back bit, so it's not going to be seen from the front of the shop. So I'm now going to leave this to dry, and I'm just going to lay that on there. And it's now lunchtime, so I'll leave that to dry for maybe half an hour or so, and then when we come back we'll add all the little paper decorations, and we need to make a little keyhole as well for the front of the drawer. So what I've done here is collect several different images. So I've got the little keypad, a credit card sign, I've called the till a Bitzer LBP 300, thought that was quite funny, and then I've got a no eating or drinking sign, and these sort of black strips, I'm not sure if you can pick up the numbers on them from there, but these are actually the digital displays for the long part of the till, and then for that little display bit at the top. And I've done 2 of each, and what I've done is I've saved this as one sheet and as a JPEG image. And just to make it easier for you, if you'd like a copy of this, then just drop me an email, julie@littlebitsandpieces.co.uk, and just put in the title Little Harbour Homewares till decals, or just something like that. No need to put any messages, because then I can just quickly go through and do a return email and attach this image. So just drop me an email if you'd like one, and I'll pop the email address below as well. And I've done 2 of each just in case we make any mistakes, and then we've got a spare. But I'm going to start with the little keypad, and I just want to start cutting them out. So I've just sort of roughly cut those out, and I'm just going to cut out what I need as I go along, just so as nothing sort of blows off of my desk. And I'm just going to use my Gorilla wood glue to glue these into place. I'm starting with the little keypad or number pad. In fact, let me just get my tweezers. Hold on to that. And I'm going to have the numbers, oops, get them the right way around, over on this sort of left hand side, just leaving a little bit of a border beside and beneath. Make sure that's square. And of course you can sort of lay these out however you like, but I've sort of sized them so that they fit where I'm about to put them, if that makes sense. You know what I mean. So this is the name of the till. I wonder if I can zoom in on that. So I've used a sort of, I don't know, very sort of modern space age sort of font on that. And this sort of thing I just did file new and then used a size 8 font. No, sorry, a size 10 font, and then printed that off. So if you wanted to call your till something else, something a bit more traditional like a sharp till or something, or, you know, use your surname or something, make it unique to you, then you can just easily make these little decals up. And that bit I wanted to put down there. Just thinking I might just cut a little bit closer around. I know I've already put the glue on. actually I'm being silly because I've got a spare, haven't I? So I'll discard that one. I just want to cut a little bit closer around because that just looked like a bit of paper and I didn't really want it to look like that. I wanted it to look more like a little sort of built-in, like plastic sign or something, you know, like they have on them, or raised writing sort of thing. Okay. We'll do a little bit of a till receipt which we'll have sort of hang in here, do that in a moment. But let's get some of the digital displays on now. And I've just put in there £12.95 and there's no, what's the word? I can't think of the, oh, you know, currency sign. I couldn't think of the word there. So there's no currency sign on there, so it will work whatever country you're in. Actually, it probably won't work in all countries, will it? If your currency is krona or something, that would be a lot higher than that. So again, this I just did a new file, did a black background, and then I used, I can't remember the name of the font either now, so I'll look that up and I'll let you know. I'll write it across the bottom of the screen now. There's a little digital display, and then I want to put one of these on both sides of that little one up there, like that. They look quite good, don't they? And then I've got the little Visa payment sign, which I'm not sure whether to have any on the back because you're not really going to see it, so I might have that on the side and then not have the no drinking or eating one here. I might put that on the back actually. I might as well now I've printed it off. And we'll be doing lots more of these for sort of other areas of the shop. And we'll do some nice little signs for the door as well. So I'm going to have this one on the side and then I'll put one of each around the back, which will only be seen sort of if I turn it to take photographs and things for advertising purposes. So let's have that on there like that. That will be seen then from the side, and then I'll put a couple on the back. And apart from the little cash register numbers pad, everything else was really easy to find. But a lot of those, if you search for cash register numbers, it wasn't allowing me to download them. And I'm not sure if that's because of the search term or, you know, just because that particular website had a block on their images. But I did sort of try 2 or 3 different images, so I don't know why that was. But all of the other little labels and signs and things were very easy to find, so if you wanted something a bit different to what I'm doing here, then just sort of get onto Google and have a look. So what I've done with that little eating and drinking one down there is hide part of my wiggly paint down there, so that looks quite good. And then that one up there underneath the display. So let's do a little till roll bit here, and for that I just want to use white paper, so I can probably just use one of these scraps that I've cut off. So cut sort of quite a narrow strip, and I didn't sort of plan for a till receipt, and then when I was looking for these labels I saw, or it sort of reminded me that we should have had one, so it is a bit of an afterthought, but I think it'll work. So what I want to do is sort of stick it there like that. I'll probably go a little bit narrower, and then we'll just fold it like that and then have a little bit dangling over there. So I've cut it a bit narrower, looks a bit thick like that, a bit wide. I'll just put a bit of glue onto that bottom bit. That there. And then crease that over. I'll just snip that off. A cocktail stick. Sort of curl that a bit. Like that. And then just one final little touch I want to put on there is a little post-it note up here, and that's another thing that we used to do, leave little notes for each other, you know, check acceptance values or look out for false £20 notes and things like that. So we'll put a little post-it note up there, and then we'll do that little keyhole, and then we're just about done. Let me tidy away all these scraps now. So for the little post-it note, I just printed off using a handwriting font called Sago Script in typeface 3, and that does actually say new minimum check amount £25. So I just stuck that on there at a bit of an angle. And then for the keyhole, I've got these long pins with larger heads than a normal sewing pin, and I'm going to cut that round bit off and use that as my keyhole. But if you haven't got anything like this, then you could just use a little piece of aluminium foil and just cut a tiny little circle and do it like that. So I'm just trying to cut through this really carefully without it flying off anywhere. So it's still got a little bit of the pin on it. I couldn't get flat up to that, so what I'm going to do is make a little dot in the centre of my drawer and then actually make a little hole with my scribe. Let's find the scribe there. I also need to find the centre from top to bottom. Across there like that. So that's there, just a really faint mark. There. So then you just use your scribe to make just a little indentation like that, and then that should take that little bit of pin that's still left there. Let me grab my tweezers again and just make sure that slots in so that it's not actually raised. I think I just need to make that hole a little bit deeper. It's not quite sitting in there snugly. Go in a little bit more, and then what I'll do is just put a tiny little bit of glue in there, and then press that into place. Press that down. Now I'm just going to try and make a little tiny line on the front there to resemble the keyhole. There we are. And then one final thing, when I worked in a shop we always had a pen laying on top of the till drawer like that, so I'm actually going to glue this one into place so that the little pocket bit must find out what that's called, is showing at the front. Let's put a little bit of glue on the back there. And I think you're going to have a lot of fun if you have a go at making this. You can put all sorts of stickers and things on it. Just going to lay that there. And what we'll do, I know we've got a lot more room under the counter yet, so I had an idea. We'll do some loose till rolls, and then we'll do a little box as well that says till rolls on the front. So there's lots more we can actually put under there. Not sure what that is there. And get rid of that little bit of glue there. Another thing we always used to find is that we'd have a little bit of change on there or something, so it might be nice to make some 12th scale change or even notes. But I am really pleased with that. It just sort of strengthens my belief that you really can make anything from wood if you just have a think about it. So let's go and put this into place. Doesn't that look good? I'm really pleased with that. I think the actual, main body of it was fairly easy to make, and then you really make it come to life with all the little stickers. I really hope you all have a go at making this, and let me see what you make of it as well. But I really love that. I think the counter looks really good now. So, like I said, we've got lots more space to fill, and we can put some little boxes of stock down there as well, put little labels on, seahorse sculptures or picnic tumblers, all things like that. So there's so much more we can put down there, and we'll perhaps do a little bit more of that in the next episode. But I really want to get some more shelving built, and I'd like to do those shelves around the outside there. I'm really pleased what we've managed to get done this episode, and I hope you are too. So that's it for today. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. Take care. Bye.